This episode is discussion with somebody
You guys want to
a little bit different. Hey everybody, on this special Unbeatable episode, we're going to take a moment and we're going to celebrate freedom. And a way of doing that is by talking to a warrior who not only fought for our country's freedom, but had to spend a lot of his life trying to find personal freedom of his own. And in this episode, Jeremy Harrell talks about where he finally found freedom after 10 years of self-destructive habits after coming back from combat. I'm going to let you hear from Jeremy in his own words where this freedom finally came from. So before we get into this episode, let me just tell you, I've got some really, really big news for the entire Unbeatable Army. Hang with me, and at the end, I'll give you a little hint at what's coming in the future. Now, here's my guest, Jeremy Harrell, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the Unbeatable podcast. Thanks for being with me today, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
It's July 4th in the United States. That's when this episode is dropping. Happy Independence Day to you, brother.
Yes, sir.
For guys like me and you, this is a bittersweet holiday, and we'll get into that in the course of this conversation. What makes this holiday, when everybody else is barbecuing and watching the fireworks and knocking back a cold one, what makes this one a little bit bittersweet for me and you? Man, you are doing some pretty amazing things now. You're on some pretty incredible stages. You have an opportunity to tell your story in some pretty amazing venues. And we're going to get into, what you're doing now later on in the show, but I want to make sure that the audience understands where this story comes from and how it begins. So you and I are both soldiers. And by the way, you may not know this, but I lived in Louisville and spent a few years there myself while I was still in the Army, teaching teaching ROTC at the University of Louisville as an NCO back in the day.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this Louisville kid that decides you want to join the Army, man. How did this thing start for you? Why did you decide to sign up? Why did you decide the U.S. Army?
Yeah, so the main reason I decided to join is I always had this desire, even at a young age, to do something bigger than myself. And I've always been an advocate for the underdog. And I never really liked bullies, right? So I decided that I would, So I decided that I would try to do something to help on a larger scale. And the other side of that is most of the men in my family throughout my lineage have served in the military in some branch, and so I just kind of wanted to continue that legacy. But mainly, I just wanted to give back to my country that's given so much to me.
I love your language. I've heard other guys say this, other guys and gals that serve in the military say this, that you basically want to stand up to bullies. And I don't know that most people out there who've never served in the military equate serving in the military to standing up to bullies. But yeah, man, that's exactly how many veterans feel. You were around, so I should be able to ask you this question, and you know exactly what the answer is. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but where were you? What were you doing on September 11th, 2001, when planes hit the World Trade Center's Pentagon, that field in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I was actually at work at UPS.
Oh, you were slinging boxes at UPS just like everybody else in Louisville. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and got the news that that had occurred, and really started thinking about what that looked like for me on the military side of the house, right? When it comes to deployment and getting sent to help, and what that kind of meant. But yeah, I remember that, and just being really saddened by that. And just honestly, I was naive in the way that I didn't think that would ever occur on our
Yeah.
homeland.
Yeah.
I just really never prepared for that.
Just about everybody in America felt the same way. Were you already serving in the military at the time?
Yes. Hmm.
So you were in the National Guard or the Army Reserves?
The reserves. Yes.
Okay. The reason I asked this question, by the way, for the audience who doesn't live in the United States, everybody who was around and alive and kind of old enough in the United States knows exactly where they were, exactly what they were doing when they first heard the news about September 11th, 2001. And I remember exactly where I was. Everybody else that was around and, kind of old enough knows exactly where they were. That's one of the reasons I asked the question. But for the rest of the listening audience, and I already know your answer to this, Jeremy, I'm just going to go ahead and say it to everybody else out there. This was the ultimate act of bullying. Terrorism, by its very nature, is basically picking on the innocent and attacking the innocent to try to get your way, which is exactly what bullies do on the elementary school playground.
Right.
And I met thousands, maybe tens of thousands of guys like you, Jeremy, who were either already serving or were thinking about serving. And then when September 11th happened, they basically said, that's it. Sign me up and
Yeah.
send me overseas, because I'm not going to let somebody bully people on airplanes, innocent civilians in, World Trade Centers. The ultimate act of bullying is terrorism. And more than a few really good people that had no connection to the military said, I'm joining, and I'm joining tomorrow because of what they just saw. And it's not, it wasn't an attempt at revenge as much as I'm not going to sit around and let bullies get away with this in my country, because if it happens here, then it can happen anywhere else in the world tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. It's a call to action is kind of what it reminds me of, right? It's really when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. What
Yeah.
are we going to do?
Yeah.
And it's just that level of patriotism that I love in our country.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you were already serving in the military kind of part-time when
Mhm.
you get notified that you're going to deploy. Take us through your combat tour in Iraq, from kind of finding out that you're about to go to where you go and what you do. Give us the whole story about your tour of Iraq early in the Iraq War, 2003.
Yeah, yeah. So we got the orders to deploy, and there were 10 of us that were going to be involuntarily reassigned to another unit. And sometimes being good at your job is good, but in this regard,
Yeah.
I guess at the end it all worked out.
We
But
call that performance punishment, when you're doing your job really
yes,
well, and so well that they're going to move you somewhere else so that you can do somebody else's job or fix somebody else's problems because of it.
yeah, yeah. And so we got the orders, went and did the pre-mobilization. We trained to go out of Wisconsin, which is always thought was rather interesting to train for the desert in Wisconsin in January, February.
Where if you're not from the United States, there is nothing but cold weather and farm fields.
Right. Yeah. And so we got done with that and went over and went to Camp Udar in Kuwait and kind of acclimated. Did a little bit of extra training, kind of waiting for the order to move to go into the country. And once that came, we went into Camp Buka, which it wasn't Camp Buka at the time. It turned into Camp Buka. It's important for the audience to know that during the initial invasion, nothing was essentially set up. It was kind of a create FOBs as you go, with very minimal equipment. So we got there and we set up. There's an internment facility there, which essentially is kind of like a prison for enemy prisoners of war. So we set up there, worked there, and then a little bit later, there was a detachment that went up to Abu Ghraib prison and worked there. And we worked with the 800th MP Brigade, and then later on the 16th MP Brigade, who come after, and essentially, escorted. There were times where we escorted prisoners from one place to the other. We maintained the FOB there. Did a lot of convoy operations, which, in my opinion, was super scary,
Yeah.
right? Because the worst place to be
Because
in
that's where
Iraq and
everybody was getting
Afghanistan.
killed. They were all getting blowed up
Yeah.
on convoys. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, historically in wars, it's the firefights, and while those are definitely, obviously dangerous, but we never thought how dangerous it could be just to be on the roads,
Yeah.
because it really wasn't a matter of when, it was if. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I spent 15 months there doing that, and then redeployed home and tried to get back into life, which I thought would be a lot easier than it was. Probably one of the most difficult, I would say, experiences of my life that I'm still not totally where I would like to be in that regard. Because I always say, you can take folks off the battlefield, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the
Yeah.
battlefield
Yeah.
leaves
Yeah.
you, right? And so yeah, that's kind of how that deployment went.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about this.
Sure.
Were you in Kuwait before the ground war started in Iraq? Before everybody rolled across the berm, air quote, and started the war?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a few days before in March, yeah, or
Yeah.
middle March, yeah.
So I'd really love to hear your honest answer on this. I
So
know what it feels like to sit there and prepare yourself for what is coming, but nobody knows exactly what to expect. Having been to combat many times in my Army career, man, it's the waiting that is the worst part of it. And can you describe? I don't know if you can think back to those days in Kuwait before all of the ground forces starts to roll into Iraq. Can you describe what it felt like for you, never having been to combat before, not really knowing what to expect, but knowing in just a few days we're crossing the border, and then after that, whatever happens, happens. What was it like for you in those days in Kuwait right before you crossed the border?
yeah, so it was a mixture of anxiety, fear, boredom, which
Sure.
nobody talks
Yes,
a
of
lot
course.
about.
Yeah.
There's nothing there, but it gives you a lot of time to think, which is it can be good or bad. But for me, it was just the anticipation of what to expect. Being my first deployment, first time in a combat environment. Of course, I had my thoughts, and of course, all the training that we have. But it really doesn't put in perspective what it's actually like, and just to know that in a few days, when you get the go ahead, that your life could change, and not just your life, but the lives of others. And it was in that moment, I think, where I really started to realize how small I was, right? Where I started to go, man, I can only do so much for myself, but I really can't do a whole lot to ensure my safety or the safety of others. And it just really it's a humbling experience because it makes you realize that you need to focus on something bigger than you, right? And yeah, so it was just that anticipation, but also there was a sense of excitement too, right? Because you practice, just like an NFL team, you practice to go to the Super Bowl, right? And essentially, for someone in the military, that would be considered
That's
kind of the
right.
Super Bowl.
Combat is
That's
the
when
Super
all
Bowl.
the
It's the ultimate
right,
Super Bowl. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So all the training is now going to be real, and so just trying to process all that. Especially, I was a young man, 21 years old,
Yeah.
um, and so it was a lot of thought, um, both good and bad.
Sure.
Uh, yeah,
I ask you that question because I know the torture that being staged and ready to go, but not knowing when this thing is going to kick off, and more importantly, not knowing what's going to happen to you when it kicks off. There's all the excitement, there's all the anticipation, but you and I both know there's also this apprehension, like, I don't know what's going to happen next. And it's terrifying. And you just described lots of moments with your thoughts. And I know more than a few guys that it was they were bordering on going insane, thinking about what's coming, but not knowing when it's going to happen. Part of the insanity of waiting to go into combat is having all of this time to your thoughts, and all of your thoughts on this unknown. I don't know what's around the corner. And man, it can be torture for a lot of guys. That's one of the reasons why I ask you this question, because this is really, really rough on even the most mature warriors. It's those moments, or in some cases, days, weeks, and months
Right.
getting ready to roll into combat. Once you're in it, and you're just reacting to what happens next. But it's
Right.
waiting to get in it that can be crazy difficult.
Yeah, and Jeff, one thing that I didn't mention that I think is a huge part of it. I don't know why it slipped my mind, but while in Kuwait, we were concerned with nuclear, biological, chemical
Yeah,
attacks.
yeah,
And so there were always alarms because maybe they thought that the helicopters coming in had some sort of exposure. And so we'd get our NBC suit on, right? And we'd get down in a bunker, which was essentially like a container underground. And there was one time in particular where we're always taught very early to always keep your I forget what the canteens full, right? And but we had bottled water, and so I remember being down in the container and realizing that I was drinking bottled water.
Right.
I didn't fill my canteens, and here it's 120 to 30
Yeah,
degrees,
yeah.
and even hotter in there. There were 60 people, and I had no water. And I wasn't the only one that didn't have any water, but now everywhere I go in life,
Yeah,
I have
you
something
got some water
to
with you.
hydrate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a wake up call. But so it was you're thinking about what it's going to look like, and then maybe nothing happens, and maybe you do a little training. I know we trained with some rangers that were across the tent from us.
Yeah.
We trained with them a little bit with some hand to hand stuff and just really trying to stay occupied. And then all of a sudden here's an alarm and you got to get your gear on. You have
Yeah.
so much time, So it was just the highs and lows. It's like
Of
a roller
course.
coaster, right? So
Yeah.
and yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. Well, I remember those times of
Yeah.
trying to scramble to get and all the time and all the years of practicing NBC, right, and putting the mask on in 9 seconds, and all. I was always thought, why do we have to keep doing this? I will
And
never question that
that's
again.
right. Then you learned real fast when you're in a combat zone and that alarm goes off and you don't know if it's real or not,
Right,
right?
right, absolutely, yes, sir.
I was in Afghanistan while you guys were preparing to go to Iraq. I watched, in fact, all of the units. I watched this on, the intelligence feeds, all the units staging in Kuwait, getting ready to roll. I watched the initial fight starting in Kuwait, and then I come back from Afghanistan, and not long later, I'm in Iraq with the Army Ranger Regiment. And we put a lot of people, a lot of bad guys in your detention facilities. But let's just call it what it is. It's kind of a makeshift prison, right? While we're sorting through how bad are these bad guys. And some of them are a little bit bad. Some of them are really, really bad. And those guys end up in an island in the Caribbean. We put we put a whole lot of people in your detention facilities, and chances are you and I crossed paths a time or two up around Abu Ghraib or a couple of other places. Abu Ghraib becomes notorious in the war in Iraq. In fact, it ended up on the front page of every newspaper in the world, quite literally, when some of those pictures of the torment or the torture or the exploitation of those prisoners happened. You're working with the MPs around there, and that's who had the responsibility for those detention facilities. Let's talk a little bit about what you experienced. Not so much what the prisoners of war experienced, but what did you experience when you were around those bad guys day in and day out?
Yeah, so I mean, I can remember, you know, so it's a mixture of things, right? There are some bad people. I also remember there being some folks who broke curfew
Uh-huh.
violations, right? Who might have been farmers or what I would consider non-combatants who just were at the wrong place at the wrong
Yeah.
time, at 21, I'm trying to remember how difficult it was for me to. It's almost as if I was supposed to not like anyone, right? Or to have any sort of I say grace and mercy. I know that's churchy, but any sort of like grace for people, and to really start to think about who they are as individuals versus um, what the worst of the worst may look like, and just really trying to differentiate, how do I treat these people, right? How do I exist around them? I remember a trip escorting prisoners from Buka to Abu Ghraib, and just, occasionally there'd be a couple who could speak English, and I remember one gentleman and asking me about my family. Now you got to be careful, right? Because you
Right.
don't know who you're dealing with,
Sure.
right? But just it seemed like a harmless conversation. We didn't get really in depth in that because part of my job is to protect my family, even if
Yeah.
I'm on foreign land, right? So he just really was interested, right? In my family, and a little bit of what it looked like to be an American, and it could have been coming from a bad place. He could have been trying to manipulate or whatever, but it just really helped me understand that this person's a human being, and I don't necessarily know what his backstory is. So really, what it did for me, those experiences, it helped me mature in a way where you know to not judge someone based on what's on the outside, based on what you've heard about them, based on even what society may think, but to give everybody an opportunity to kind of learn who they were. So, um, and it kind of depleted the hatred that I think sometimes the military tries to inspire, not in a bad way, but so that you can do some tough things and when you have to. And so anyway, it was just a big learning experience for me, and it just made me realize that these people essentially, a lot of them, not all of them, right? There's some very very bad people, and I know that you all did an extremely amazing job of making sure that we held them accountable. However, there were some there that I believe didn't need to be there, that were really just trying to do the best they could with their family in the middle of this combat zone. Right? We've never experienced the kind of combat in our backyards as these people have for hundreds of
Yeah.
years, and so I just had a little bit of compassion for that, a little bit of empathy about what they've experienced.
This is fascinating. I didn't expect the conversation to take this turn. It takes a very mature warrior to look at the enemy and realize that's just another human being. And if I were in the same circumstances, the kind of language that you're using right now, Jeremy, this is really unusual, except in the most mature warriors, because it's easy to dehumanize the enemy, turn them into something less than you, and make their life less valuable to you. And in fact, I think a lot of times warriors do that to make it easier for them to sleep with themselves at night for what they just did to another human being. I had the privilege of getting to know somebody who was a very significant warrior in combat early in my military career, and he made a statement to me, warned me, Jeff, don't ever turn the enemy into anything less than a human being. You will have to live with yourself for the rest of your life if you do, for what you feel or what you might do to them if they ever become less than a human being on the other side of the battlefield. I had to force myself. I had to work hard. And that's just because I had some pretty amazing people early in my career helping me. But I've known guys that have gone to war for years that never got to the point that you did of recognizing that's just another human being over there. And maybe they're a very, very bad person and they need to be in this place and, taken off of the streets so they can't do harm to innocent people. But it's still another human being. And I think the people that are able to adjust at some point later on in life are the ones that have the mature look at the enemy like you're describing. It's very rare, and it usually only happens with some very mature people and usually very mature warriors.
But yeah, I have to give credit to the Holy Spirit. I think as a young man, I don't know that without the Holy Spirit, I'd have that maturity to be able to do that, especially in the culture. But thank God that He gave me this heart to think deeper into the
Yeah.
matter and to realize that we're all sinners who deserve death at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? So I just kept that in mind, and if I was in a foreign country and I was considered a prisoner of war, how would I want to be
That's exactly
looked
right.
at
Yeah.
and treated?
Yeah.
And So I think there's a right way to do things, even in the most terrible circumstances.
Totally agree. One more quick question. So we talked
Sure.
about the anxiety in Kuwait, but waiting for the war to happen. But you spent a lot of time in convoys on the roads. And I know what Iraq was like 2003, 2004, when convoys were getting blown up by the hundreds every day in Iraq. So, literally, getting on a vehicle, you were putting your life in the line, just driving for 5 minutes through the streets. And you did it a lot. And the thing about those roadside bombs is you really never knew until it went off where it was going to be and how bad it was going to be. So it's kind of a slow form of torture to get on vehicles every day and go, convoy down a road that I might get blown up. Everybody that I know in my unit might get blown up today, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. And here we go again on day, whatever, month 12, month 13, month 14, month 15. I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about what that relentless anxiety about getting back on the convoys and going back in the city streets, not knowing if today's the day you're going to get blown up and killed, was like.
Yeah, that's a great and very difficult question, because it's interesting that I may not have remembered what I did 2 days ago, but I remember, as soon as you say this, I remember the
It
feeling,
all
right?
comes back,
As if
right?
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, absolutely. And I think our brains do that to protect us. But what I remember is just, I, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was to accept death.
Yeah.
Especially as a young man who had my whole life in front of me.
Right.
I had a young daughter
Sure.
at the time, but I was afraid. I'm not going to sit here and say that I wasn't afraid. And I thought that and when you're in a vehicle, you have so little control.
Yep.
You're essentially,
I'm
and if
laughing
you're
because
in
I
a,
know exactly what it feels like.
yeah,
The next corner, the next block, the next,
yeah, right,
next kilometer, it may be my last moments on earth.
right. And one thing that the enemy was really good at, and I have to be transparent and say that it impressed me, from a technical standpoint, is their ability to build bombs. Um, just and because you just never knew, they would hide them under concrete, thin layer of concrete. They'd put them in dead animals. I mean, they just got really creative, and so your head's on a swivel constantly. You're in this heightened sense of, you feel like you can't even look away. And you feel like if you start, I just remember, for me, thinking about my family and then going, I can't think about that. Like, the second I'm thinking about my daughter, who I miss tremendously, I miss the very beginning of her life, I can't really think about her, because in an instant
That's
it
right.
could all be over.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so, and then my job is to look around and help try to detect, with the human eye
Uh-huh.
of all things, in the middle of a sandstorm, oftentimes trying to, figure out if this thing on the side of the road, or if this gentleman over here with this cell phone,
Or that vehicle
if
that's coming at you is full of
right.
explosives in the back. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was just a constant, and you're right. Torture is a good word for that, because I do remember even saying it to myself, like, how much can a human take with this level of anxiety? Right. And of course, it created problems that come after, and problems that I still deal with today. But yeah, it was probably the most scariest environment that I have ever been in, and probably ever will be. And just, again, not having that control, not knowing when, if you're in a firefight, you can kind of get a grip on where the enemy may be, where the fire's coming from, and be able to react. In a vehicle, you're a sitting duck, essentially, especially if there's one thing that they did a lot, was they would block overpasses, to stop you. And that feeling, oh man, Jeff, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. That feeling of just saying, well, here it comes. And so, the only way I was able to get through that was to convince myself that I probably will not make it home. And then once I flipped that switch, I wasn't afraid anymore,
Yeah.
because I'd already almost essentially accepted it.
I
Right. That,
I hope people listening are hearing you. Like, it is so torturous on the mind that maybe
mm,
one of the only ways to deal with it emotionally and mentally is to just decide, that's it, I'm going to die. This next overpass is going to be the moment I'm going to die. I don't know exactly how it's
Right.
going to happen, but it's coming. And when you get back to your base and back to your bunk, you think to yourself, how am I still alive right now? I was totally convinced that I was going to die.
Right.
Day in and day out for 15 months.
And then you got to know that that's not the last one,
Yeah.
right? That you're going to
It's
have to
going to
do it
happen again
again.
tomorrow and the day
Yeah.
after and the
Yeah.
day. Yeah, sure.
Right. So,
I
yeah. Oh man, it gives me chills just
I
thinking about it.
asked that question just so that you can start to get into the discussion now of how much life changed, how much you changed when you came back. And I'll just say to the audience, I've never met a guy or a gal who's came back from combat, who experienced some trauma in combat, who's not different. Every single person that I've ever met, and I'm talking by the thousands, would all say I'm different. Some slightly different, some way different. But everybody's different. Not everybody struggles. Not everybody goes through self-destructive patterns, but everybody comes back different. In your case, it sounds like you struggled. It sounds like you struggled so much that you spent 10 years basically trying to kill yourself with every possible means and
Yeah.
method available. So now let's talk about what those next 10 years were like after combat.
Well, so I remember coming home and trying to reacclimate to life, and to be honest, I thought this was just my new normal. But everybody around me uh, could instantly see a difference. I was always a very compassionate guy. Just to kind of give you a backstory for the audience and for yourself, is that when I was 17 years old, before I joined the military, I would go by senior living apartments and take grocery store orders when it snowed, so that people wouldn't have to get out. That's who I was, right? And so, which was a lot of inspiration for serving, right? Is selflessness. I've always exhibited selflessness, and then so coming back, I didn't have that anymore. I was an angry man. I only knew one way of surviving, and that was in chaos. And so if chaos didn't present itself, I was really good at subtly, yeah, I would create chaos, Jeff, and not even know that I did that, and would swear up and down that someone else did it. It was always, well, if you wouldn't have done that, if you wouldn't have made that noise, if you wouldn't have slammed the door, but in reality, it was obviously just the trauma and just the experiences. And of course, being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and all that. And I didn't, again, fairly young, healthy guy, didn't know what all that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And this first 10 years, I didn't even go and seek counseling or any of that kind of thing. When people would recommend that for me, I would say that's for other
Yeah,
guys,
other guys need
right?
that. I'm doing okay, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I got a heart. My thing was I had a platoon sergeant who would always say, "Harrell, you have a heartbeat?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you're doing better than most." Right. So that always lived with me.
Yeah.
I would say, "Hey, I have a heartbeat. What else can I ask for?" So yeah, I mean, I've been divorced, a couple times due to the issues coming home. So there's lifetime implications that I still deal with from that experience, and the whole time, if you was to ask me, Jeremy, how are you handling things, I would have said, I'm doing just fine, uh, because in my mind, I was surviving. I was so used to being in survival mode that I didn't even realize what quote unquote normal life even looked like anymore, right? And then when it was a symbolism of normal, I didn't like it because either it was too quiet or there wasn't enough going on, or I felt like I didn't have a purpose. So it was just a cyclical thing of being angry and depressed and hyper vigilant and just all the stuff associated with post traumatic stress, and then I started to become that, which we'll talk about later down the road. That become my identity,
Yeah.
and then I had to figure out a way out of that.
Yeah, one of the things that the military did really well after the wars in Iraq, well, during and after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, was start to diagnose people that
Mm,
had a disorder because of the post-traumatic stress that they were dealing with. But sometimes that label got tossed around so much that it was no longer a thing that you were experiencing. It was now who you are as a person. And post traumatic stress, I can't tell you the countless number of times that I heard people say my PTSD, and they use the word my with PTSD because they've heard it so much that they associate themselves with it. And I've always thought, man, yes, you may be experiencing, maybe you still are going through some form of PTSD, but you don't have to own it and live with it and, let it become your identity. But some guys and gals, they they will go down a self-destructive path after coming back from combat, and they will destroy their own lives, literally. Some people do it the short way by using a pistol or pills and kill themselves, but a lot of my friends do it the long way, and they use self-destructive habits over weeks or years or decades in some case because they can't live with themselves, and they're really,
Right.
both of them are trying to kill themselves. One of them is just doing it in an instant, and another one's doing it over a couple of decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-medicating, uh, living dangerously, taking unnecessary
Taking
risks.
crazy risks, right? Hoping that this
Yeah. And
one will
just,
kill you.
yeah. And then, you kind of get addicted to the adrenaline,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you come home and that adrenaline's not there anymore. You don't get much adrenaline taking the trash out, right? And so you start to, again, subtly, without you even knowing it, you start to create these situations. And man, it just wears on you physically and mentally, and especially spiritually. And yeah, you're right. So you're right. There's way too many. Um, you know, over I think the number now is around 7,500. We've lost, killed in action, and since 9/11, whereas over 31,000 we've lost since 9/11 to their own device. And so that really, right. And so that really, yeah, yeah. So that really kind of tells the story of, we may be off the battlefield, but it still lives in us, and we just need to find a way. Which, I've been lucky enough or blessed enough to figure out a way to live with these
Yeah.
things, but not everybody has. So
Well, you used the phrase new normal. I've seen this for many years. You can take the warrior, guy or gal, out of the firefight, but it's really, really hard to take the firefight out of the guy or the gal once they've been in it. Like, to get them to be able to adjust and live and thrive and flourish in the future. Holy smokes, man, that's hard. And a lot of my friends, like you, don't adjust. They end up destroying their lives. And unfortunately, I know way too many of them are now that they've taken their own life. You didn't become one of those statistics, but you could have. And Jeremy, I want people on this Independence Day to have real independence, and I mean independence from the torture that's going on inside of them, not just from some kind of external bondage, but also the internal torture or bondage that they're dealing with. So, man, I'm just going to give you the chance to tell everybody what changed for you. How did you actually end up getting healthy after 10 years of wrestling with what you experienced in combat?
yeah, well, so the honest truth is, I don't know that I'm healthy.
Yeah,
I think I'm healthier,
right.
but no, the change for me was when I developed a relationship with Jesus Christ. Um, it it didn't take away any of the symptoms. It didn't quite make my life easier in the physical
Yeah.
world, but I knew where to go with all the heartache, with the torture, with the torment, everything that was creating this chaos and this just atrocious lifestyle for myself. I knew to leave it at the foot of the cross. And the peace that you get, um, with having a relationship with Christ is a peace that I don't think, or I know, isn't replicable anywhere in life. Like, it is just different because you can be right in the middle of the mess And we all are in our own ways, all the days of our life. And I think we will until we join Christ, right? But in heaven. But he's able to comfort you in a way that the medicine can't do, the way that alcohol and drugs and women and all the vices that I had, the fighting, just all the things I try to use to fill the hole. Only Christ was able to fill that hole. There's been nothing before or now or in the future that I believe is going to be able to fill that hole. And I'm just so thankful that I have that, and regretful that I didn't have it sooner, because I didn't grow up in an environment where we even talked about God. I never stepped foot in a church that I remember as a child, so I wasn't raised to be faithful. And sometimes the worst things in your life can push you in that direction, because one thing that I realized is I was trying to fight all these symptoms and trying to fight all this trauma, is how small I was and my inability to win the battle. And so I remember up in upstate New York going to this chapel and praying this prayer of saying, okay, God, I give up. Right. And that's not a word we use in the
That's right.
military. We don't
Warriors don't
submit.
use that
Yeah.
that language.
Giving up, submission.
Yeah.
Submission's a hard one.
Yeah.
But in reality, I had to submit myself to him so that he could do the work in me, because I was unable to save myself. And that's the biggest message. Is I know that we sometimes consider ourselves warriors who go in and save, and we've done some amazing things, and we are warriors, but that doesn't mean that we have the answer
Yeah.
to all of life's problems, right? But we have to know who does, and we have to develop that relationship. And that's why I use relationship opposed to religion, because I believe it's a relationship, right? And so that when I started to develop that, and it developed very slowly, Jeff, I didn't want to let go of everything.
Sure, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to hold on. I even wanted to hold on to the bad things, because at least they were comfortable,
Yeah.
even though it was uncomfortable.
Yeah. They were
right.
defining
And,
you, and it's hard to let the
yeah.
things that define you go. Yeah.
Right. And so, man, over the course of much, and I'm making this sound for the sake of the podcast and the time that we have, I could take a week to tell you how many failures and how many setbacks I've had on that path of developing this relationship and believing. But that's what's so good about God is he forgives us unconditionally, loves us more than anybody ever could, more than we ever could love ourselves. And we just got to know that, hey, this is a practice, and we do the best we can to be the most obedient we can. But at the end of the day, we're sinners who deserve death, and thankful to God that we ain't going to experience death. But when we get to heaven, then we won't have these problems. But yeah, that was the turning point for me. If I'm being honest, it was almost a last resort. I wanted to do everything else because I wanted the results from the relationship that I was seeing in other Christians. Right. I never once thought their lives were easy. In fact, I think I'd argue that being a Christian in your life can even get more difficult when you look at it from a worldly perspective. That is something that we have to do better, I think, as a church, to make sure people don't decide to do that because they think everything's going to be easy. But I just knew where to take it, where to offload it, and who to give it to. He asked for us to give those things, and man, that was the turning point. And again, I'm still in the fight. Every single day, I have weeks and months and moments where I get in a rut, but thankfully I have good brothers, and I say that good men, Christian men, and for the men listening, that is not really an option. We have to have good, solid Christian men around us to pull us out of the wreckage, right? And so I have that, and so that's been helpful. And then of course. The work that we do with Veterans Club, helping other people, that's therapeutic intervention for me. That's essentially the medicine now, right? Is to get outside of myself and outside of that identity, that false identity that I am, my symptoms, and then go and help others get out of that same identity.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love your language but basically what you're saying is I'm haunted by my past and there's nothing I can do to make my past go away. It's going to be with me for the rest of my life. So now I try all of these things to make it go away. I tried the alcohol and the women and all of these self-destructive things, but none of them are making my past go away. None of them are making it better. And the last thing any human being wants to do, but especially a warrior, is surrender, is to get to the point of saying, I can't do this anymore. I mean, it's kind of contrary to human nature, which is exactly what Jesus asks of people. He basically says, when you're ready to totally wave the white flag and unconditionally surrender, not Jesus, if I do this for you and you do this for me, we're both good, but this is like, I can't do this anymore. I'm laying it all in your hands. That moment is the moment that he comes along and says, I'm going to help you with that past. I'm not going to make it go away, but I'm going to help you with it. And I'm going to walk with you through it. And man, everything changes after that. And I'm saying this to somebody who's driving and listening right now. I'm saying this to a mom who's doing some chores while this is playing in the background, who's struggling with something in their past and they really, really need some help. And the real help, as much as you might not want to hear it, the real help doesn't happen until you get to the moment like Jeremy and you totally unconditionally surrender. And I'm convinced that's the moment where Jesus says, okay, now I can work with you now that you're finally at this point. But before that,
Yeah.
if you want to try to handle it on your own, go knock yourself out, man.
And let me be the guy that tells you that will not work, so that you don't have to go through what I went through. But the other important thing I think about faith is every person of the Bible that done amazing things had a hard life.
Yeah, they all had a past, right?
They all had
Every
a
one of them.
past. They all had flaws.
Yep.
They all had their own issues. Well, you know what? God chose these people, and He
Every
chooses
single
us.
one of them. Yep.
Yeah, and He chooses us, and we're not qualified in our eyes, but we're qualified in His.
Yeah.
And it's just, and He doesn't even. It's just the most welcoming love and relationship that I could ever anticipate. And again, I still live with these issues, and they do creep up on me. But now I have somewhere to take them. Now I have somewhere to look for the understanding of why they exist and what sin is and the difference between sin and God and how sovereign God is over everything and how there is a greater purpose for all that we go through, and how He can take a mess and turn it into a message.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what He's done in my life.
Yeah, he's done the same with me, man. He took a guy who was a mess and radically turned things around. And one of the reasons you're on the show, Jeremy, is not just a guy who went to combat, saw some things, not just a veteran who struggled for a long time with what you saw, but not only did God turn things around for you, now you're helping turn things around for other people. And one of the reasons you're on the show today is because of what you're doing with Veterans Club. So tell everybody what's happening there and the impact that you guys are making.
Yeah, so initially, Veterans Club was a social group, and the whole idea is I knew there were other people out there who were having a hard time transitioning back into life, and the whole goal of this organization for my wife and I, who's a big part of it, she is a mental health therapist. She was to get veterans and their families together for connection and camaraderie. I thought if we can get each other together, that is the foundation of everything we can do after that. Because I know you probably experienced this too, Jeff. When we get into a room full of veterans, it's within minutes we feel like we've known these folks our whole lives, and it's hard to replicate that in the civilian world. I think we do a great job in the military of really having those authentic relationships. And so that's what I wanted to recreate, because I would hear guys say, I don't necessarily miss my job or what I did in the military or the hurry up and wait, but I do miss the people. And I thought, well, we don't have to be in uniform anymore to bring that together. And so that's essentially how it was founded. And then we were able to grow organically. But the most important thing I want people to know about why Veterans Club turned into what it was, because on paper it shouldn't have. I didn't have all the necessary qualifications. I didn't have all the education or the investors or anything like that. God was always at the center. And I just said, God, whatever it is for you to do in me to help build your kingdom, I'm open to that. And so he put me in a position, a place I knew, and then we just started helping veterans one at a time. And then now we help thousands of veterans across the country nationally recognized for the programs that we offer. And our motto is doing life together. I wanted an organization to be a place that felt like family. I didn't want it to be so corporate. I didn't want it to be so commercial. I wanted to know each other's children and our spouses and just to really do life together. And I'm just so grateful that God has helped us create that. And that's been the attraction because, there's so many great organizations out there. And I think one of the biggest compliments we ever got is because they feel like we're actual family, that we care longer than however long the program lasts, right? So the aftercare, all the things. So and what it's done for me is it's created an outlet to be able when I get in these ruts and I get into these spaces of where I feel like, my experience in war is getting the best of me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we've created this amazing group of individuals who understand us like perfectly, right? Even sometimes, the VA does a great job, but even sometimes those therapists don't truly understand because it's hard to replicate that in the real world. But these people do. So now, when veterans come and say, Jeremy, I'm just looking for someone who understands. I'm like, well, there's thousands of people in this area who understand. And really everything else organically blossoms from that. It's just been so good to watch. And God has given me, Jeff, a front row seat. Because that's my role, right? I'm in the front row. I get to watch what God does. And man, he just does it. He just does it. And he does it perfectly. And I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah, you guys are doing a lot of stuff to help veterans. And I mean, in many ways, but nothing is more important than connecting veterans with each other.
Yeah.
And as God gives you the ability, connecting veterans to Jesus. You're also in high demand, and lots of people want to talk to you about veterans issues. So you get a chance to be in some pretty big venues. And as a result, you get a chance to tell the story of, and champion veteran causes. And I just want to say, man, thank you for continuing to stand up for the guys and gals who stood up for freedom and for our country. There's about a dozen other things that I'd love to be able to talk about, but for the sake of time, I know there's some people listening right now that are saying, man, I really want to know more about Jeremy Harrell. So how can they find out about you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to connect with me is going to veteransclubinc.org. And on the website, you can send an email. It's a contact page. You can put your contact information, type a message, send an email. And if you want to talk to me, that will get forwarded to me. And then I'm open to talking to anybody, whatever you need. That's one thing that I promised myself and I promised the folks we serve is no matter how much we grew, we would never lose that personal aspect of because that's what God loves, right? And so, but yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, that's the easiest way to do that. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to be a part of this organization. It's important to know that you don't have to live in Kentucky. We do things all over the country, and we have, and because we have virtual, just like we're doing the podcast today, we can do many things via virtual online presence. And so connect with us, connect with me. I'd love to hear you and to get to know you and your story. And Jeff, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I pray that this really helps someone, especially on July 4th, which, like you said, like Memorial Day, it can get somber because we know the cost of the freedoms that we experience. And so don't get in that rabbit hole by yourself. You have people to help. So thank you.
For a lot of veterans out there, when that fireworks is going off and everybody else is oohing and on, they're thinking about buddies that are not with us anymore. And I'm glad that there's a place out there like Veterans Club Inc. that people can go to and connect with others that feel exactly like they do on July 4th. If you missed that link, we're going to put the notes, or we'll put the link to Veterans Club down in the notes to this episode. But Jeremy, man, thank you for what you've done for freedom. Thank you for being on this show with us. And man, it was great to talk to you today.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
All right, buddy. We'll see you. I hope that you heard something today from Jeremy that caused you to say, I'm going to get connected. I'm going to get connected to somebody else who's been going through something similar so that I'm not alone and isolated and struggling. Or maybe this was the episode that caused you to say, I need to get serious about getting connected with God. And if that's you, I hope that you'll reach out to some friends that maybe have this relationship that Jeremy was describing and ask them if they can sit down and talk to you a little bit more about how you can have that relationship too. Hey, I just want to say, Jeremy, thank you for all that you've done for our country. And on this Independence Day episode, thank you for explaining where real freedom comes from, even freedom from the mistakes of your past. Hey guys, there's a lot of amazing people connected with us. And for some of you out there who are been very faithfully following the Unbeatable podcast for years now, I said it at the beginning, there is something big coming in the future. And all I need you to do is just stay close and stay connected, and we will give you what's coming. I'm not going to spoil the surprise today, but I will tell you, if you hang with me for some future episodes, we'll tell you what's coming in the future. Or better yet, if you're already connected on social media, just hang on and we'll start to give you some ideas about what the future is bringing in the next few weeks or next couple of months with this whole podcast and these amazing people that have been following us for years. If you're not already on social media, just search for @Unbeatable Podcast. And while you're there, you're going to find people like our fan of the week this week, Chili Palmer. They're amazing people that are out there connecting with one another and connected with this podcast. And Chili, I want to say thank you for being so active, so involved, and staying so connected. That's why you're our fan of the week this week. The best way to stay connected is to just become part of the Unbeatable Army. That's our free email list where I deliver content directly to your inbox once or twice a week. I'm not going to spam you, not going to blow up your inbox, not going to ask anything from you. But if you want me to deliver some motivational content directly to your inbox, it's totally free. Just simply go over to unbeatablearmy.com, and that's where you're going to get the big news in the future. So thanks everybody for being part of this episode. I hope you have an amazing day wherever you're at in the world, and I hope that you're experiencing the real independence that Jeremy described today. See you next week for my next episode of Unbeatable. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.